Next, would like to ask Steve Snyder-Hill for proponent testimony. If you would mind coming forward when you're ready.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, and distinguished guests, before I start, I have some prepared remarks, but I just don't want anybody to misunderstand that if I show a lack of emotion or even anger, that is just how I mask the pain of what happened to me and the anger that this continues to cause me. My name's Steve Snyder-Hill. I'm an actually proud Army major of 30 years. I say that because I just put in for my retirement. I'm super happy. I'm going to be retiring from the Army after a long service since 1988. I'm a resident of Columbus, former Ohio State University students, and all three of those distinctions are important today as I come before you and ask you to support House Bill 249 to rescind the statute of limitations for those who hope to hold Ohio State, other state colleges accountable for their actions, or more accurately, inaction in the cases of sexual assault and abuse. The Army lists 7 core values to every new recruit that's embodied in the way that we live and signing up to serve our country. Those are duty, honor, integrity, loyal, personal courage, respect, and selfless service. So as an Army major, I try to use those core values every day in both my military and civilian life. And as an American, I hope the qualities that I'll aspire to as well. As a citizen of Ohio, I hope those values that you will pursue today. So here's my story. In 1995, I went to Student Health Services to Ohio State to seek medical attention for a lump on my chest. I went to Dr. Richard Strauss, and instead of treating me, he sexually assaulted me, like you're hearing others say. Dr. Strauss asked unnecessary and inappropriate questions about my sexual orientation, my sexual desires. Then he performed what he said were necessary testicular and rectal examinations on me without gloves, neither of which, of course, was actually anything necessary that I had to do for the reason that I sought medical attention in the first place. And when Dr. Strauss finally got around to checking the lump on my chest, he laid me down and he pressed his pelvic area against my side. And while I sat there vulnerable, I could feel his erect penis pushed against me and prolonged during the examination of my chest as he sat there and rubbed my chest. It was horrific and intimidating. I complained the very next day. This is my complaint from 1995. I went to OSU the very next day and I spoke with the assistant director for student health in 1995 who put my complaint in writing right here. And I asked to speak with the head of Student Health Services, who then was Dr. Ted W. Grace. At the time, after speaking with Dr. Grace, he arranged a meeting and put me in front of my predator, Dr. Strauss, OSU's Director of Counseling, and Dr. Grace. During that meeting, Dr. Strauss slammed his hand down at me, and he said that I was trying to ruin his reputation. Can you put yourself in my place? This university put me in front of this guy and let him belittle me. I was traumatic to be confronted this way by this man who just sexually abused me. And at the end, OSU's employees said that this was all a misunderstanding and I was confused and mistaken about what had happened. That's what they told me. But I couldn't have been more right. So I persisted and I spoke with Dr. Grace again, and I said that I demanded 3 things from him. I wanted him to promise me, number 1, that it never happened to anybody else. I wanted him to promise me, number 2, that if it ever happened again, that I would be notified because by God I would be back. And number 3, I wanted him to put it in a file of Strauss's. So he sat there and he listened to everything, and I talked him through these medical forms and asked him to make these changes to medical forms, which they provided me in 1995. And at the end of the phone call, he said, "That's fine, I think we can do all that." And so I said, "That's fine, then put it in a letter to me." And there was silence on the phone. And that's the letter that I have today from Ted Grace, where he lies to me all 3 times about Dr. Strauss and assures me that nobody had ever complained before, when in fact, we've had 20 years of complaints. So, I'm sorry, I'm going off my script because I'm actually just telling you what happened. Dr. Grace falsely accused me and said that nobody had ever complained before. But then when I found out when Perkins was released that there indeed was a complaint, 3 days before me, 3 days a kid came in and complained about getting sexually assaulted by Dr. Strauss, and that man looked me in the eye and told me nobody had ever complained, and then put it in a letter to me. We all know now, in fact, that Dr. Strauss sexually abused and assaulted countless students in his 20-year tenure at OSU. And I know, because I came forward, that the OSU officials knew what was happening, but they turned a blind eye. Instead of holding Strauss accountable, they continued to insist that students see him for medical attention. I've joined scores of other students to hold the university accountable in court and demand changes that would prevent this from ever happening again. When we came forward, OSU's response wasn't to deny what that monster did to us. They just said, it's just been too long. For many students, Ohio's statute of limitations presents an obstacle for ensuring that OSU is held accountable for what the school officials allowed Dr. Strauss to do again and again and again. If they had listened to me, Brian Garrett would not be sitting in that seat right now, because it happened after me. I'm here today because I believe our laws and our lawmakers should prioritize protecting students against sexual assault rather than maintaining policies that protect universities that cover up the truth and look the other way. Neither Ohio State nor any other college or university should be able to use the law to help them protect and cover up sexual predators like Dr. Strauss. I believe my experience shows that any student of any gender or background can be the target of sexual abuse when you're supposed to look the other way instead. Today I'm asking you to send the survivors a strong message that Ohio's leaders will no longer look the other way. And let's send Ohio State a message too, that time doesn't undo the damage inflicted when predators like Dr. Strauss are given free rein to abuse young people, and the law shouldn't either. Our laws and our rules, basic moral decency, should demand accountability for people like Dr. Strauss who enable them. The committee should be the first step in making sure this happens. Ohio State had 4 decades to do the right thing, but never lifted a finger to stop Strauss or to help any of the students abused. Despite numerous students coming forward and reporting his abuse, numerous school officials knowing, nothing ever happened. I know, because I was one of them. But because of school's efforts to sweep everything under the rug, many students didn't understand that Strauss was abusing them, and they had no idea of the role that OSU was playing in covering up the abuse. And now they do understand these things, and OSU wants to lean on Ohio's statute of limitations as a way to try to make its responsibility for what happened evaporate into thin air. Well, I'm here to say loud and clear to all of you and to OSU that what happened to me and the other survivors just doesn't fade away. The ramifications and the inaction that we've seen from OSU do not expire. Neither should the opportunity to hold these people accountable. So on behalf of those abused, assaulted, and mistreated by Dr. Strauss and OSU, I ask you for action, a vote on House Bill 249, a vote to uphold the strong core values that have always made the armed forces in the great state of Ohio strong: duty, honor, integrity, loyal, personal courage, respect, and selfless service. Please show OSU the power of those values to effect change that it's refused to make on its own. And in closing, I just want to say this, that, on a Friday afternoon, OSU will throw out a soundbite to people like that we're going to be the leader in a sexual assault task force. They throw that out for the media to hear and for everybody to think, wow, that sounds really good. And then they wait for the next big football game or something to take everybody's minds on it. That's what they did to me back in 1995. That's what they're doing to us now. And you guys have the power to not let them do that to us again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Major Hill, for coming forward, and also thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Do we have any questions for Major Hill? Representative Golonsky.
Thank you to the chair. Thank you so much for your bravery, and I really actually very much appreciate your service to the country. It's important.
I appreciate that.
Your testimony was very powerful. Do you believe that in similar situations where others were victimized by either other universities or other powerful entities, that those victims should also receive justice, no matter how much time has passed?
Absolutely. I think that when somebody can look you in the eye and lie to you and tell you that this has never happened, how can it isn't fair for me to say it's just been too long. You lied to me Do you understand the trauma that you go through 24 years later to see that guy's face on TV and to smell his breath? I could smell his breath when I saw his face, and all I could think is I did everything humanly possible that I could do to stop him, and they shut me down. They told me I was confused and mistaken. And then to sit here today, there's so much anger and rage that it's hard for me to come across this hurt because I'm so angry. That just masks everything else. But yes, I believe that everybody deserves the right to, if they were lied to or if they were deceived, nobody can tell any of your kids that it's just been too long if somebody abuses them sexually. I appreciate it.
Representative Crossman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Major, for your testimony. It's obviously hard to listen to these stories. I can't imagine the trauma that people have been going through. You mentioned that obviously Dr. Grace lied to you. Do you think people like Dr. Grace, or if there are other individuals that made misrepresentations or should have done more, should they also be held to account, or just the university?
I think that anybody that was complacent of that needs to be held accountable. Dr. Grace works in another university today in the same position that he had at OSU. So I would tell all the parents that send their kids to that school that that school needs to take accountability for this and not let that guy who had this terrible misjudgment to lie to me and to hide this stuff. And he didn't even document anything about any of my stuff or the kid before me until a year later when a third kid came forward, and that's when he documented everything to cover himself. So there was so much wrong stuff that happened at OSU, and they never want any of this out. They would rather it just go away with the statute of limitations.
Just one follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, you may.
Thank you for your response. Do you think there's other individuals that could have or should have done more that should also be held to account?
Absolutely. I think that if Dr. Grace, for example, looked at me and if he tried to throw somebody else under the bus and say, I was ordered by whoever to do what I did, I would look him in the eye and say, you're a medical physician. You have a responsibility. If somebody comes to you, I was a kid, comes to you and says that they were sexually assaulted, you have a responsibility. And I don't care what you say about who might have told you to do what, you lied to me. And absolutely he needs held accountable. If that guy gets PERS pension from OPERS, public employment, that should be removed. He should lose his job. Again, I don't want to come across as just angry because that's all I've been. If you look at my Facebook feed, there's thousands of posts where I'm just angry, and I just need to get over this. I really do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the witness.
Sure. Any other questions for the witness? Seeing none, thank you, Major.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to call forward Brian